My name is Jenn Burt, and I'm a graduate researcher. I was going to get you to guess what I study, but I suppose that introduction doesn't need that anymore. So I study salmon, and specifically sockeye salmon, and I like to refer to myself as a salmon scientist. It sort of sounds catchier than graduate researcher. I work, like I said, at UBC, and I work in the Pacific Salmon Ecology and Conservation Laboratory. So I work with a group of people. And I'm doing what's called a master's degree. So when you finish high school, you do an undergraduate degree or a college degree for 4 years. Then you love school so much that you decide to go and sign up for it some more. And after a master's degree, if you want to continue in the academic path, you could go on to a PhD and then maybe become a professor one day. So I'm still in that sort of middle state. But what's nice about going back to do a graduate degree is you get paid. There's a lot of funding for master's projects, so you get paid to go to school, which is nice. So I think of it as a job. And I'm going to tell you more about what I do first, and then at the end I'll kind of come back to some tips that I've learned along the way. So me and my group do work on the Fraser River sockeye. So the Fraser River is actually a huge river. It drains about 25% of the province. And we do a lot of our work in the lower Fraser area there, so actually in sort of the area around here. And the busiest time of year for us is the fall, because that is when the sockeye are returning back towards their spawning grounds. And it's a fantastic time to be able to find the sockeye to do research on them because they're right there and in the rivers. So I do what's called experimental science, so that means we ask questions about things we don't know about, and then we try and find the answers by doing sort of structured experiments. And so the question that I'm asking in my research is, how is the development of salmon, the early development stages, affected by warmer temperatures or temperatures that are maybe warmer than what they're used to? So I'm kind of looking at climate change impacts on salmon. So to do that, I need to look at the developing stages of salmon. And to do that, I need to make salmon babies. So a couple years ago, we do the field work, and we went out to Weaver Creek Spawning Channel, which is actually only a 2-hour drive from here, and I would highly recommend people going to see it in the fall. It's a wonderful place to go observe salmon. We collected males and females and got really wet and slimy by squeezing the eggs out of the females and squeezing the milt out of the males, and we keep them all organized in these little Tupperware containers. You never look at your lunch the same way anymore. And then we take those milt and eggs and bring them back to the laboratory. So this is the lab that we have at UBC, and we call it the wet lab, but I call it the Mad Science Fish Lab, because that sounds cooler. And so we took those eggs that we gathered from different females, and we put each of those eggs into specific jars for each female, and then we carefully put in a few drops of milt from each male. And then we added water, and you add the water, and that kind of makes the magic happen. It allows the eggs to be fertilized. Then we put those fertilized eggs into little containers and incubated them in that sort of space-looking zone in the corner. And we incubated them at different temperatures. So we have a regular stream temperature, a medium warm temperature, and then a temperature that's quite warm or quite hot for salmon eggs. And I go down every day in the winter time when they're incubating and pick out the dead eggs, which would be the yellow ones there. And being a scientist involves collecting a lot of data, so you have to be very organized. You keep a lot of data sheets and write things down and check mark things. We'd watch them as they were developing. We'd count them when they got to what's called eyed stage, so you can see they have little eyeballs there. It was pretty hectic when they started to hatch, because I had, there's 10 baskets in that top left panel there, but I had about 400 baskets in total. So I was trying to record when they started hatching, how long they were hatching for, when they finished hatching. I was picking out the ones that died while they were hatching. It was a pretty crazy time. Again, supportive parents, very excellent. And so here's just a quick little video to show you some of the hatching's actually a challenge for some of the little alevins. It takes them a little while to pop out of their chorions there. And they spin around sometimes. Sometimes their head comes out first or their tail comes out first, but they have a hard time with it. And so when they came out, we would sample from each little basket and take weights and lengths of the alevins. We measured how long it took them to absorb their yolk sacs as they were developing towards being fry. And then when they become fry, we were doing other experiments on them, looking at their swimming behaviors, their feeding behaviors. Other people who are doing different projects took the fry that I had raised and are now looking at muscle compositions, enzyme compositions, doing more sort of physiological studies. So there's really a lot of connected work. So that's my work in a very small nutshell. But what's neat about being in graduate school is you don't necessarily focus 100% of your time on your project. It's a very kind of collaborative environment, and you get to spend your time helping other people with their projects. So I got to spend some time out on the Harrison River, again, not far from here, on one of the nicer, sunnier days on the river. And we were doing some beach seinings. We were collecting the maturing adults as they were coming in and looking at doing some behavioral studies and some radio tagging of those fish. I helped another researcher friend, Stephanie Avery Gom, who's looking at the presence of this endangered minnow, the Nooksack dace. And so I went out with her for a couple days, and we were netting or seining in these little streams in Chilliwack and looking for this minnow and pulling out other cool creatures like freshwater crayfish. Last summer, I got to go to Johnston Strait, which is the area between the mainland and Vancouver Island, sort of around Campbell River. And I was working on a sockeye salmon fishing boat, and I was helping place acoustic transmitter tags into the bellies of returning sockeye salmon as they were making their return migration. Then we use all these acoustic technologies to actually track them on their migration back to the spawning ground. So that was a really wonderful experience that I got to have as well, especially because in 2010 so many fish came back, so that was kind of a nice bonus. And the other thing that I get to do a lot that I really love is teaching. So I, like John mentioned, I used to work here at the aquarium teaching the education programs, and in graduate school I still get to do some teaching. So I've assisted with a couple courses, and this is a picture of helping out with an aquatic conservation field course for students in the undergraduate program, and we were learning how to sample, do terrestrial sampling for amphibians. This was a little rough-skinned newt that we found. So I really value environmental education. That's been an important part of my path as well. So the sort of take-home is that grad school is pretty fun. The fish told me to say that. But it's really an opportunity to have a variety of really different experiences and explore different types of learning. So it's been for me a really wonderful experience. So a couple sort of pieces of advice or things that I've kind of thought about along the way that I would impart on others would be to take your time and take advantage of experiences. So I didn't go high school, undergraduate degree, graduate degree. I took time off in between all of those steps, and I worked in different jobs, I traveled, I volunteered, and that to me was really valuable and still is really valuable now. Planning ahead can be helpful. When I finished high school, I actually applied to university right away and deferred my application, so I sort of had a saved spot in university, and then I went and I volunteered in Africa for a while. I worked as a snowboard instructor in Whistler, so it was kind of a nice opportunity. I encourage people to explore new places. I went and did my undergraduate degree in environmental science at McGill, which is in Quebec, in Montreal. And that was a really wonderful opportunity to experience a new culture, learn a new language. I sort of had so-so French, but when I took the time to learn French when I got out there, which sort of leads me to my next point about learning new skills. They might just come in handy. I learned French because it was, a great opportunity to ask for my café au lait and baguettes in Montreal. But when I moved back to Vancouver, that was actually how I got my job at the aquarium, because I started volunteering here. And the position for the French programs coordinator opened up, and I had known French, and it allowed me to sort of apply for that position, which I wouldn't have been able to without that skill. I've also spent time doing a lot of bike touring, and I learned sort of some basic bike mechanics, and that led me into getting a job as a bicycle tour guide for a little while, part-time in between those gaps of schooling. So those new skills have become really useful now. And like I mentioned, volunteering, and the first speaker was mentioning how important volunteering can be. It can be a really wonderful way to get experience. So I actually obtained my job here, and I started as a volunteer. I came into the volunteer program, was working actually with the French programs for a while because I wanted to find a way to kind of improve my French and learn more about marine conservation. And so that opportunity led me to getting to know people here, and then when the job came up, I had both the combination of knowing people and being really familiar with the facility, but also having the skill set that matched the job requirement. And I would just say follow your interests. They take you to the right places. I'm still on my road towards perhaps more schooling, perhaps teaching. I've got lots of ideas, but I'm just following sort of my heart and my interests, and I know they've led me to great places so far and will continue to do so. So thanks very much.